Rain hammered the steel roof that night, turning the San Quentin courtyard into a pool of shadows. The alarms hadn't gone off yet, but they would. Inside cell block C, a man everyone called Reese, Ghost, Delaney sat quietly on his bunk, staring at the tattoo of a broken clock on his forearm. The hands were frozen at 11:47, the exact minute he swore he'd escape. Outside, lightning cracked across the bay, and for a split second, his cell bars lit up like fire. Reese stood, adjusted his gray jumpsuit, and whispered, "Tonight's the night." He'd spent the last 6 months carving a tunnel behind the old radiator in his cell. Every night after lights out, while the rest of the inmates slept or cursed at the guards, he chipped away at the concrete wall with a piece of sharpened metal he stole from the kitchen. He hid the dust in his mattress and sealed the cracks with toothpaste and soap. Nobody knew. Not his cellmate. Not even the guards who checked his cell twice a night. But what Reese didn't know was that someone had seen him. When the siren finally screamed across the prison, it wasn't because Reese had been caught. It was because he was gone. For 40 minutes, chaos ruled San Quentin. Guards ran down the corridors, flashlights slicing through darkness, dogs barking from the yard. Then came the order: lockdown. By sunrise, they found something that froze everyone's blood. Behind the kitchen, near the outer fence, lay a hole barely big enough for one man to crawl through. The tunnel led out toward the drainage ditch. Freedom was just 20 feet away. But in the middle of that tunnel, face down in the dirt, was Reese Delaney. His hands were still moving. He was clawing at the dirt like he was trying to dig himself out from a nightmare. His lips were bleeding, eyes open wide in shock. When the guards pulled him out, he kept repeating the same words over and over. "He sealed it. He sealed it behind me." No one knew what he meant. But when the guards checked the tunnel, they found something even stranger. The opening behind Reese had been covered back up from the inside, as if someone had closed it while he was still crawling through. That night, the warden ordered the entire cell block searched. They tore open mattresses, scraped off paint, checked every inch of Reese's cell. Inside the radiator hole, they found something that didn't belong there: fresh fingerprints burned into the concrete, like the wall itself had melted under someone's hands. And when the prison lights flickered out for just a second, one of the guards swore he saw a shadow move inside Reese's empty cell. But to understand what really happened that night, how Reese, Ghost, Delaney even got to that moment, you need to know who he was and what drove him to risk everything for freedom. Reese had been at San Quentin for 8 years, serving life for armed robbery and assault. Before that, he was a mechanic from Oakland. Tattoos covered both arms, an eagle with torn wings, a skull with roses growing through the eye sockets, and that broken clock on his wrist. He wasn't a monster, at least not in the beginning. He was just a man who made the wrong deal with the wrong people. The first few years inside, he kept his head down, worked in the laundry, stayed quiet. But things changed when a new guard named Officer Kellen took over his block. Kellen had a habit of pushing inmates past their breaking point. Random cell checks, fake write-ups, taking away privileges just to watch them snap. Reese never talked back, but every time Kellen shoved him, something inside him boiled a little more. Then came the day that changed everything. It started with a fight in the yard, a gang brawl between the Aryans and the blacks. Reese tried to stay out of it, but Kellen thought he was part of the chaos. He threw Reese face first into the concrete and sent him to solitary for 2 months. No sunlight, no noise, just darkness and the sound of dripping water. That's where he started planning his escape. When he got out of solitary, he started observing, timing the guards' rotations, counting every second between the flashlight sweeps. He even got close to the maintenance guy who fixed the radiators, offering him a cigarette or a favor just to learn how the vents were connected. That's when he found out. His cell backed up against the old kitchen wall, sealed off years ago after a fire. Nobody ever checked it. For 6 months, he turned that discovery into a tunnel. The other inmates thought he was going crazy because he barely spoke. He ate less, slept less. Sometimes, he just sat by the radiator, whispering numbers under his breath. He wasn't counting days anymore. He was counting seconds to freedom. But in prison, secrets don't last. Someone always talks. A man named Rico, with tattoos of serpents coiled up both arms, was Reese's bunkmate for 3 weeks. He saw the way Reese hid things behind the radiator and tried to blackmail him for cigarettes and protection. Reese refused, and one night, Rico was moved to another block. The next day, Reese woke up to find a small message scratched into his wall. "You're not the only one trying to get out." From that day on, Reese felt watched. His tools went missing. His soap wall cover was tampered with. He heard footsteps near his cell at night, even when the guards weren't around. He told the chaplain about it once, said he felt something in his cell, like someone breathing behind him. The chaplain told him it was just guilt. But Reese knew guilt didn't whisper your name in the dark. And so, on that stormy night, when the lights flickered and the sirens wailed, Reese didn't hesitate. He went for the tunnel, crawled through the dirt, dragging his tattooed arms forward. He was almost there. He could smell the rain and feel the cold air on his face. Until something behind him moved. He turned his head and saw. Reese froze. The tunnel was so tight he could barely turn his shoulders. But he felt it, the cold rush of air from behind him, followed by a sound that didn't belong underground. A slow drag, like someone, or something, was crawling toward him through the dirt. He blinked, trying to see through the darkness. His hands shook as he reached for the small pen light he'd taped to his wrist. When he flicked it on, the beam caught a figure just a few feet behind him. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't Rico either. It was a man with pale eyes, covered in dust, tattoos running down his neck in strange, faded symbols. "Keep going," the man hissed. Reese's blood turned to ice. The stranger's voice was cracked, raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. His uniform wasn't gray like Reese's. It was brown, the kind they stopped using decades ago. "Who the hell are you?" Reese gasped. But before the man could answer, the tunnel shook. Dirt rained from the ceiling. Reese turned back toward the exit. He could see faint moonlight from the opening ahead. Freedom was right there. He scrambled forward, his fingers clawing through the mud. Behind him, the man laughed, a dry, broken sound that echoed down the tunnel. "Don't leave me here again, Reese." Reese stopped. Again? He'd never seen this man before in his life. His heart slammed against his ribs. He turned to shout, but the man was gone. The tunnel was empty. Then, the wall behind him, where he'd crawled from, began to collapse inward. Dirt poured down, sealing the space shut. Reese screamed, pushing forward with everything he had. His fingertips brushed the cool air at the edge of the hole, when a hand shot out from the dirt and grabbed his ankle. He kicked, screamed, and twisted until the grip loosened. He crawled the last few feet and burst out of the ground, gasping for breath in the open rain. For a moment, he just lay there under the storm, rain washing the mud and blood off his face. The outer fence was only a few yards away. The lights from the watchtower flickered in the distance, lightning flashing across the bay. He was free, or at least he thought he was. Then the siren blared. Guards flooded into the yard, guns raised, dogs barking. Reese stumbled to his feet, sprinting toward the fence. The floodlights caught him in mid-run, his shadow stretching across the wet concrete. A guard shouted something over the megaphone, but Reese didn't stop. He climbed the inner fence, cutting his palms on the razor wire, feeling it slice into his skin. He dropped on the other side, panting, one fence left between him and the open road. That's when he saw him again. The same man from the tunnel, standing on the other side of the outer fence, motionless in the rain. His face was blank, but his eyes burned like dying coals. He lifted a finger and pointed straight at Reese's chest. Not this time. The ground beneath Reese trembled. The wet dirt near the fence began to sink. Reese tried to move, but his legs were stuck, as if the ground itself was pulling him under. He clawed at the mud, screaming as the rain mixed with soil, swallowing him inch by inch. The guards reached the scene seconds later. They found Reese lying face down near the fence, half buried in the mud. His hands were still reaching forward, just inches from the last barrier. When they turned him over, he was breathing, eyes wide open. But something was wrong. On his chest, etched deep into the skin like a fresh burn, were the same faded symbols that had been tattooed on the stranger in the tunnel. No one could explain it. The prison cameras caught almost everything that night, except the part between the kitchen and the fence. The footage just cut out for exactly 1 minute. 1 minute missing. And when it came back, Reese was already outside, covered in mud, screaming about a man who never made it out. The next morning, the warden ordered a team to dig through the tunnel. They went 5 feet deep before they hit something hard, a set of old bones wearing a prison uniform from the 1950s. The tag still had a name on it, Reese Delaney. But Reese, the living one, was still locked in solitary, staring at his tattoo of the broken clock, whispering, "It's 11:47 again." The first thing Reese noticed was the silence. No rain, no sirens, no barking dogs, just the low hum of the fluorescent light flickering above his head. He opened his eyes and squinted. The concrete walls around him were painted white, but the color did nothing to brighten the place. Solitary confinement. Again, his body ached all over. His wrists were wrapped in bandages. His chest burned like fire, right where those strange symbols had appeared. He tried to lift his shirt, but his hands trembled too much. The last thing he remembered was crawling through the mud, reaching for the fence, and seeing that man with the empty eyes. Now he was back inside San Quentin. The heavy steel door had no window. No sound came from outside. Reese sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. His fingertips brushed over the tattoo of the broken clock on his arm. The ink looked darker now, almost fresh. He rubbed at it, but it didn't fade. It almost looked like it was bleeding. "How long have I been here?" he muttered. No one answered. He leaned his head back against the cold wall and closed his eyes. He saw flashes, dirt closing in, a voice whispering, "Not this time." He didn't understand what it meant. Was it a dream? A hallucination? Maybe he'd lost consciousness during the escape. But then again, those burned symbols on his chest were real. After what felt like hours, a metallic clank broke the silence. The slot in the door opened, and a tray slid through. Just a cup of water and a piece of dry cornbread. A guard's shadow moved past the opening. "Hey," Reese called out. "How long I've been here?" No reply. "Come on, man. Just tell me what day it is." Still silence. The shadow paused for a second, then walked away. Reese sighed, pressing his palms to his eyes. He was losing it again. Solitary did that to people. It made time meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. There was no window, no clock, nothing to measure life by except hunger and the faint hum of electricity. But then he heard it. A faint tapping sound. It came from the wall behind him, the one that separated his cell from the next. 3 quick taps, then silence, then 3 more. Reese frowned and pressed his ear to the wall. "Who's there?" he whispered. No answer. He tapped back, 3 times, mimicking the same pattern. For a moment, nothing. Then, the same tapping came again, but this time, slower. Like someone was thinking before responding. He pulled away, his heart beating faster. That side of the cell block was supposed to be empty. No inmates had been placed there for years. It was part of the old solitary wing that had been shut down after a fire decades ago. Reese stared at the wall, his breath fogging the cold concrete. Then, from the other side, a voice spoke, low and broken. "You shouldn't have gone back in there." Reese jumped to his feet. "Who is that?" he shouted. No reply. Just silence again. He slammed his hand against the wall. "Talk to me." "What do you mean, back in there?" The voice came again, faint but clear this time. "You opened it. You let him out." Reese froze. He backed away from the wall until his shoulders hit the opposite side of the cell. "Who did I let out?" he whispered. The tapping returned, faster now, more urgent. It sounded like fists pounding the wall. Reese covered his ears, but the sound grew louder, like it was coming from inside his own head. Then it stopped. Everything went quiet again, except for the buzzing light overhead. Reese stood still, barely breathing. His chest throbbed with pain. He lifted his shirt and looked down. The burned symbols had changed. They were darker now, almost carved deeper into his skin. He stumbled back to the corner of the cell, pressing himself against the wall. "I'm losing my mind," he whispered. "It's just solitary. Just my head playing tricks." But deep down, he didn't believe that. Hours passed. Maybe days. He wasn't sure. The tray slot opened again once or twice, but the guards never spoke. Then, one day, the door finally creaked open. "Delaney," a voice said. "You got a visitor." Reese blinked against the sudden light as 2 guards entered. They handcuffed him and led him down the long hallway. His bare feet slapped against the cold floor. The corridors were empty, too empty. Normally, there'd be noise somewhere. Inmates shouting, doors clanging. But today, nothing. Just the echo of his footsteps. They brought him into a small room with a glass window. On the other side sat a man in a gray suit. Mid-50s, tired eyes, thinning hair. Reese didn't recognize him. The guard pushed him into the chair and stepped back. The man leaned forward. "Reese Delaney?" Reese nodded cautiously. "My name's Dr. Harold Beck. I'm a forensic psychiatrist working with the state." I was asked to evaluate your condition after your incident. Incident? Reese said. You mean the escape attempt? Dr. Beck adjusted his glasses. Escape attempt? You mean the night you were found outside the kitchen wall, unconscious? Reese frowned. Unconscious? I was outside the fence. The guards found me. Dr. Beck cut him off gently. Mr. Delaney, you were found inside the wall. The old maintenance shaft. You'd collapsed in the dirt. There was no tunnel, no opening, no fence. Just solid concrete. Reese stared at him. That's not possible. I saw the sky, the rain. The mind can create very real experiences when under extreme stress, Dr. Beck said calmly. You'd been in solitary for nearly 2 months before this happened. Deprivation can cause vivid hallucinations. Reese shook his head violently. No. There was a man. He was there. He had tattoos, old uniform. He said I left him behind. Dr. Beck's expression didn't change. What did his tattoos look like? Reese hesitated. Symbols, like circles, with lines through them, burned into his neck. Dr. Beck slowly reached into his briefcase and pulled out a yellowed photograph. He slid it under the glass. Reese leaned forward, and his stomach dropped. It was the same man. The pale eyes, the thin mouth, the tattoos. Under the photo, a name was printed, Reese Delaney, inmate number 1217, 1953. Reese's throat went dry. What is this? Dr. Beck folded his hands. This man was your grandfather. He served time here in the 1950s. Attempted to escape through the old kitchen tunnels. The structure collapsed, and he was buried alive. Reese's heart pounded in his chest. That can't be true. My grandfather died before I was born. My mom said. She said he left. Dr. Beck finished quietly. She didn't know the truth. His records were sealed after the collapse. The prison didn't want anyone to know an inmate had tunneled that far. Reese pressed his trembling hands against the glass. You're saying that was him? In the tunnel? Dr. Beck's voice softened. Sometimes, trauma carries through generations. Maybe your mind filled in the blanks. Or maybe, he paused, looking directly into Reese's eyes, something unfinished found its way back. Reese leaned back in his chair, breathing hard. His tattoos felt like they were burning again. The symbols on my chest. What are they? Dr. Beck looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, those aren't in your medical report. Reese frowned. What do you mean? When you were brought in, Dr. Beck continued, there were no marks on your chest. No burns. Nothing. The blood drained from Reese's face. He yanked open his shirt to show him. But when he looked down, the skin was clean. Smooth. The symbols were gone. He looked up again. The doctor was gone. So were the guards. The room was empty. Reese spun around. The door was closed. The glass window in front of him was cracked down the middle, and beyond it, the visiting room was dark. He banged on the door. Hey, somebody. Hello. His voice echoed, but no one came. The fluorescent lights flickered again, and for a split second, he saw movement behind the glass. The outline of a man in a brown uniform, standing perfectly still. Reese stumbled back, his breath ragged. The man's face was blank, but his lips began to move, whispering words Reese couldn't hear. Then, slowly, he raised his arm and pointed to the clock on the wall. It was stuck at 11:47. Reese's knees buckled. His mind spun. He didn't know what was real anymore. The rain, the tunnel, the man, the bones they said they found. But deep down, one truth clawed at him, louder than the fear in his chest. Whatever his grandfather started in that tunnel, it wasn't over. And now, it was his turn to finish it. The hum of the light faded into a low, vibrating growl. Reese stood in the middle of the empty visiting room, staring at the cracked glass that divided him from the darkness on the other side. The air smelled like old dust and burnt metal. He could feel something watching him, not with eyes, but with weight. The clock on the wall hadn't moved. It still read 11:47. He took a slow step backward, his breath fogging the glass. This isn't real, he muttered under his breath. This can't be real. But as soon as he said it, the bulb overhead flickered and buzzed louder, bathing the room in a stuttering light. For one split second, the reflection in the glass wasn't his. It was the man in the brown uniform, his grandfather. Same hollow eyes. Same burned tattoos crawling up his neck. Stop, Reese whispered. Just stop. The man's reflection smiled. The glass cracked again, a spider web spreading across the middle. Then the entire pane shattered inward, exploding across the floor in a burst of sound. Reese shielded his face and stumbled back, cutting his palm on a shard. When he looked up, the other side of the room was gone. The metal chairs, the table, the door, all gone. Only a long hallway remained, stretching endlessly into darkness. A single flickering light pulsed at the far end, like it was calling him. He didn't want to move, but something inside him, the same pull that had made him dig that tunnel, forced his legs forward. Every step echoed, soft at first, then heavier. His breathing was loud in the silence. He passed old, rusted doors with numbers faded beyond recognition. The paint on the walls peeled like dead skin. Somewhere far away, water dripped, steady and slow. He kept walking. The air grew colder with each step. He could see his breath now. The hum of the lights faded into whispers, soft voices he couldn't quite make out. They seemed to be saying the same thing over and over, but the words were slurred, like echoes underwater. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly open. Yellow light spilled through the crack, faint and trembling. Reese reached out with his shaking hand and pushed it open. What he saw made him freeze. The room beyond wasn't part of the prison anymore. It looked like an old workshop, stone walls, wooden beams, rusted tools hanging from hooks. In the center stood a heavy table covered in dust and papers. And carved into the table, deep into the wood, was that same circular symbol he'd seen burned into his chest. Beside it lay a photograph, black and white, old and torn. It showed two men standing in front of the San Quentin wall. One was his grandfather, smiling. The other was a guard with dark eyes and a familiar smirk. Written in pencil across the bottom were the words, "The 1147 Pact." Reese picked it up. His hands were shaking. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Behind him, a voice said softly, "It's what you inherited." He turned sharply. A man stood by the door. It wasn't the ghost this time. It was Officer Kellen, the guard who'd tormented him before the escape. But his uniform was clean now, pressed, almost new. And his face looked younger. "Kellen," Reese gasped. The man smiled faintly. "You thought I was just another guard, didn't you?" Reese took a step back. "You're dead. They said you." Kellen raised a hand. "I never died. I just stopped existing where you could see me." Reese's skin crawled. "What do you mean?" Kellen moved closer, his boots silent on the concrete floor. "This place doesn't let people go, Reese. Not the guards, not the prisoners. Your grandfather made sure of that." Reese shook his head. "My grandfather tried to escape." "He didn't try to escape," Kellen interrupted. "He tried to contain something. Something the prison dug up when they expanded the old kitchen tunnels back in the 50s. Something that shouldn't have been touched." Reese's voice trembled. "What did they find?" Kellen looked at the symbol carved into the table. "They called it the passage. A space between what's real and what's buried. It opens for exactly 1 minute every night at 11:47. Reese's heart thudded in his chest. "That's why the clock." Kellen nodded. "Your grandfather volunteered to seal it. He marked his skin with that symbol to bind it. He went in, and the tunnel closed behind him. But when you started digging, you broke the seal." Reese stumbled backward, the photograph falling from his hand. "You're saying I let this thing out?" Kellen stepped closer, his voice calm, almost kind. "It doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is that it's awake now. It took your grandfather first. Then it took me. And now." He leaned in until his face was inches from Reese's. His eyes were black now, glossy and hollow. "It wants you." The lights exploded. The walls shook violently. Reese covered his head as the sound roared through the hallway, like the entire prison was collapsing. He could hear screams, hundreds of them, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. When the shaking stopped, the room was gone. He was standing in the middle of the prison yard again. But it wasn't night anymore. The sun was high, the sky clear. The yard was full of inmates, guards, movement, life. He looked around, stunned. Everything looked normal. A guard blew a whistle near the gate. "Delaney, move it, you're on laundry duty." Reese blinked. What year is it?" The guard frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "It's 2015. Reese's stomach dropped. He'd been arrested in 2024. He turned toward the yard, searching for any sign of what had just happened. But everyone moved like nothing was wrong. Inmates laughed, shouted, played basketball. The walls were clean, the towers untouched by rust. He looked down at his arms. The tattoos were different, faded, like they'd been there for decades. And when he glanced at the reflection in a puddle near his feet, his breath caught in his throat. The face staring back wasn't his. It was his grandfather's. He stumbled back, heart hammering. No, no, this isn't happening. A voice behind him whispered, "It always happens." He turned. It was Kellen again, standing by the fence, watching him. But now, he wore the old brown guard's uniform, the one from the photo. "You finished what he started," Kellen said softly. "The circle is closed. Time doesn't move forward in San Quentin anymore. It folds." Reese's voice cracked. "What do you mean it folds?" Kellen smiled faintly. "Look around. You think you escaped? You just traded places." And then it hit him. He wasn't in his own body anymore. His grandfather hadn't died in that tunnel. He'd been trapped in it, caught in a loop that never ended. And when Reese tried to break free, he'd reopened it, switching places with the man who'd been waiting all those years. The siren suddenly wailed across the yard. Guards shouted. Inmates ran for cover. Reese turned toward the noise and saw another figure near the kitchen wall. Muddy, frantic, trying to crawl out through the same spot where he once had. It was himself, covered in dirt, bleeding, screaming. The version of Reese who'd tried to escape hours ago, or maybe years. The ground trembled beneath his feet. The clock tower struck once. 11:47. The air grew thick and cold, and for the first time, Reese understood what his grandfather had meant. The prison wasn't a place, it was a loop. Every time someone tried to break free, the cycle began again. Kellen's voice echoed faintly through the chaos. "Some places don't hold prisoners, Reese. They feed on them." Reese stumbled toward the fence, desperate to reach the version of himself still trying to escape. But the world around him began to dissolve, the sky melting into gray, the yard twisting, faces stretching like reflections in water. He screamed, reaching out, and everything went black. When the light returned, he was back in his cell. The same concrete walls, the same radiator, the same sound of rain against the roof. Only now, on the wall beside his bunk, something new had been scratched into the concrete. "Don't dig. 11:47 never ends." Reese sat down slowly, trembling. The tattoo of the broken clock on his arm had changed again. The hands weren't frozen anymore. They were turning backward. Outside, the siren wailed once more, low, long, endless. Marcus Lewis woke up to the slow hum of fluorescent lights and the bitter sting of antiseptic in the air. His body ached like it had been crushed by concrete. Bandages wrapped around his chest and shoulder, and when he tried to move, a sharp pain tore through him. The sterile smell of the infirmary told him one thing. He was back inside San Quentin, alive but caged once again. His throat was dry. "Where's D'Lo?" he whispered. The nurse glanced at him for a brief moment, eyes heavy with pity. He didn't make it. The words hit Marcus harder than the sniper's bullet. D'Lo, the only man who had shared his dream of freedom, was gone. The friend who had planned the escape down to the minute, the one who always said, "We make it or we die trying," now lay cold, somewhere beyond those concrete walls. Marcus closed his eyes. The memory replayed in flashes, the floodlights, the sirens, the scream of metal as they climbed the outer fence, the bullet that found D'Lo before freedom did. The taste of blood and dirt filled his mouth all over again. Days passed. He was transferred to solitary confinement, a 6-by-8-foot cell with a steel bed and walls that hummed with silence. Every breath echoed. Every thought screamed. Time didn't move. It just sat still, heavy, pressing down on him. On the third day, a guard stopped by. "You're famous now," he said with a smirk, sliding a tray of cold food through the slot. Marcus didn't reply. But later, when he overheard the guards talking, he learned what that meant. The media had run the story. Inmate tries to escape San Quentin, fails in bloody shootout. Reporters were calling him the man who challenged the impossible. Some called him reckless, others called him desperate. But no one knew the truth. He hadn't done it for fame. He'd done it because he couldn't take one more day of being forgotten. Weeks turned into months. The silence became his punishment and his only companion. He carved small lines into the wall, one for each day he survived. His tattooed arms, once symbols of power and rebellion, were now pale from lack of sunlight. The inked name D'Lo across his forearm became a ghost he couldn't escape. Sometimes, late at night, he swore he could hear his friend's voice echoing through the vents. "We almost made it, brother." But San Quentin had a way of keeping people where they belonged, in body, in mind, and in memory. Then, One cold morning, the door opened. The warden walked in, tall, gray-haired, and cold as steel. "You caused quite the scene, Lewis," Warden Grayson said, holding Marcus's file. "You realize you'll never leave this prison alive now?" Marcus looked up slowly. "I already knew that," he said. The warden studied him for a moment, then added, "You had a good mind. You could have done something decent with your life. Why throw it all away?" Marcus let out a weak breath. "Because I was tired of dying slowly." The warden said nothing. He turned and left, leaving the echo of his boots behind. After that visit, Marcus changed. He stopped talking. He stopped counting the days. He just sat, listening to the hum of the lights and the faraway clangs of steel doors. But San Quentin wasn't done with him yet. One night, a young guard slipped a folded note under his cell door. It read, "They're moving you soon. Don't ask why." Marcus stared at it for a long time, unsure whether it was a warning or a setup. Then, just before dawn, the sound of keys woke him again. "Lewis," a voice said. "Get up." He was cuffed, shackled, and led through hallways he didn't recognize, deeper than the usual cell blocks. The air was colder, the walls wider. They stopped in front of a steel door marked restricted access. When it opened, Marcus saw a narrow corridor lined with cameras and bright white lights. Inside was a small room with a single metal chair. "Sit," one of the men said. Marcus did. Across from him, behind a glass wall, Warden Grayson appeared again. "Marcus Lewis," he said, voice calm but sharp. "You tried to escape once. Now, we're giving you a chance to leave again. But this time, it won't be through the fence." Marcus frowned. "What are you talking about?" The warden smiled faintly. "The state's running a new behavioral program. We're testing it on lifers, people who have nothing left to lose. Congratulations, you're the first." Before Marcus could speak, two men in lab coats approached. One held a syringe. The other strapped his arms down. "Wait," Marcus said, panic in his voice. "What kind of program?" No one answered. The syringe pierced his skin, cold liquid flooding his veins. The room began to blur, sounds stretching into whispers. His heartbeat slowed. His vision dimmed. The last thing he saw was the warden's face behind the glass, his reflection split by the thick glass pane. Then darkness. When Marcus opened his eyes again, he was lying on the ground, but something was wrong. The air was different, warmer, freer. He looked up and saw sunlight breaking through trees. Birds overhead. No fences. No walls. He stood slowly, confused, staring at his own hands. The tattoos were gone. His wrists were clean. He turned around. There was no sign of the prison. A voice echoed faintly behind him, one he hadn't heard since the night of the escape. "Come on, brother," D'Lo said, smiling. "We made it." Marcus froze. "D'Lo." But D'Lo just smiled again, and then the world flickered like a broken TV screen. Then darkness swallowed everything again. Somewhere deep beneath San Quentin, a monitor beeped steadily. A man in a lab coat scribbled on a clipboard. "Subject 01 showing increased neural activity," he said. "Simulation stable." Warden Grayson nodded slowly, watching Marcus's body on the table, eyes closed, brain wired to a machine. "Let's keep him there," the warden said. "He wanted freedom. Now he can live in it, forever." The man adjusted a dial. Marcus's heartbeat slowed to a peaceful rhythm. On the monitor, Marcus stood under the sunlight, smiling beside D'Lo, free at last, in a world that wasn't real. And somewhere inside that illusion, he whispered, "We made it." They said no one ever escapes San Quentin. Maybe they were right. Because Marcus Lewis didn't break out of the prison. He broke out of reality itself. End of story.